all, but we do think there are 5 possible explanations for this. First, I think one factor behind the meltdown was that there were some tweets that created a little bit of outrage on social media. And it was President Trump responding to some Democratic veterans suggesting that they can ignore orders from Congress. And that first tweet was at 9:17 a.m. The second one came at 10:21 a.m. He said, seditious behavior punishable by death. Now, notice the timestamp. That's 10:21, and the market turned down just a few minutes later. That tweet led to Democratic Congress members and leaders protesting the death threats against Democratic members. Now, the second thing that I think did contribute to the decline is the release of the Epstein files. So President Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law and now has ordered these files to be released. There's going to be a lot of people in those files. In fact, for instance, here's someone pointing out that it could even embarrass many donors, billionaire donors. So you can imagine there might be investors who are just nervous who's going to be on that list, and it's revealed. Does it do something to markets? I think that contributed to some of the nervousness today. The third factor is crypto. Bitcoin has been selling off recently and generally has led the equities, but you can see at the open, Bitcoin peaked and began to weaken at 9:30, and the S&P followed basically an hour later. This has been the case for some time. It's something I've pointed out, that Bitcoin has been leading the S&P. For instance, Bitcoin peaked on October 10th. That's right before we had that liquidity shock, which ended up being the biggest liquidity shock in the history of crypto, wiping out more than 2 million accounts. And Bitcoin's been falling since. But as you can see here, this has led to the S&P spider peaking on October 29th. And it's something I was interviewed on CNBC today, and I mentioned that since October 10th, there was this feature called ADL that caused a significant amount of liquidations, and it was really due to a pricing error. But that pricing error has not has created significant holes in the balance sheet. In other words, the reason crypto has continued to have lingering weakness is that market makers who play a critical role in crypto have weakened balance sheets from that liquidation event on October 10th. Now, market makers are essential to crypto liquidity. They're essentially acting like central banks because they provide liquidity. And their pulling back is the equivalent of QT for crypto. So you can imagine crypto is suffering from tightening conditions along with a hawkish Fed. Now, in 2022, when a similar event happened because of FTX, it took 6 to 8 weeks to recapitalize those market makers and for market function to recover. So we're about 6 weeks into this process. The fourth factor is Oracle and CDS, because there was quite a lot of chatter about this. As you know, there's many skeptics of AI, people even questioning NVIDIA's numbers. But what's catching people's eyes is Oracle's credit default swaps are rising.